vanishing folklore and beliefs. Stories of Old Greece and Rome by Emilie Baker, circa 1913, public domain reading. Echo and Narcissus. Echo was a wood nymph and a follower of Diana, and she had the one fault of wanting to talk all the time, especially if she found someone who was willing to listen. One day Juno went down in great haste to the earth, suspecting that Jupiter was spending too much time in the society of the nymphs. But before she had gone very far into the forest, she met Echo and stopped to speak to her. Now Echo knew that the ruler of the gods was happily engaged with the nymphs, and would not be pleased at his wife's sudden appearance. So she began to talk rapidly to Juno, and to tell her such entertaining stories that the unsuspicious goddess was waiting and listened. While Echo was thus keeping the jealous queen from seeking for her husband Jupiter, he was warned of her coming, and he left the nymphs and returned in haste to Olympus. When later on Juno learned that Echo had intentionally kept her listening so that Jupiter could make his retreat unseen, she was so angry with the officious nymph that she forbade her to ever speak again, except to repeat the last word of any conversation she might hear. Thus she could never more tell beguiling stories or interfere in behalf of Jupiter. At first Echo was very miserable over this misfortune, but in spite of it she managed to spend her time happily in the forest and to hunt with the other nymphs of Diana. One evening, as she stopped at a brookside to drink, she met a handsome youth named Narcissus, and at once she fell in love with him. But unfortunately she could not tell him of her affection, except by languishing looks and sighs. Narcissus was not at all pleased by her evident interest in him, for many maidens had loved him, and he had turned coldly from their advances, preferring instead to roam the forest alone. Some time later Narcissus was hunting with a companion, and having rushed away in pursuit of a stag, he found that his friend was no longer in sight. He called to him, but no one answered except the devoted Echo, who was always dogging his footsteps. When Narcissus called, "Are you here?" Echo replied, "Here." "Come," cried the youth, and Echo answered, "Come." And then she appeared before the young hunter and mutely begged for his love. But Narcissus scornfully turned from her, exclaiming, "You shall never have me." "Have me," cried the unhappy maiden. But her frank offer was repulsed, and the hard-hearted youth turned away. Echo made no further attempt to win his love, but went into the mountains to live out her sad life alone. No one ever saw her again, and in time she pined away and died. But her voice remained, to whisper among the hills, and to give back the last word to anyone who sought to call her. As for Narcissus, his scorn of love brought its just punishment, for Venus decreed that he should suffer even as poor Echo had done. One day when he was hunting in a remote part of the forest, he came upon a beautiful deep pool in which all objects were reflected as clearly as in a mirror. No wild things had ever come to drink of the cool stream. No feet of beasts had ever trampled the grass on its margin, or muddied its pure waters. Not even a floating leaf had ruffled its calm surface. When Narcissus knelt on the lush grass at the pool's edge and looked down into the clear water, he was surprised to see a beautiful face gazing up at him from the depth of the pool. He leaned nearer, and the face did not withdraw, but seemed to approach his own. Then he put out his arms to the water nymph who he believed was returning his advances, and he was delighted to see two white arms stretched out as if to clasp him in their embrace. But as soon as he attempted to grasp them, there was only the cool water in his hands, and the nymph had vanished. When the surface of the pool had grown clear again, and Narcissus leaned anxiously over it to see what had become of this baffling maiden, there she was, still gazing at him with her beautiful eyes. Again and again Narcissus strove to embrace her, but she eluded his eager arms, and each time he clasped only the unsubstantial water. Maddened by these repeated defeats, he spoke reproachfully to the water. He asked why she tormented him, but though the lovely mouth, so near his own, seemed to move as if framing words, no answer came to his appeal. Each day Narcissus sought the forest pool, and each day he found the nymph ready to return his smiles and his fond looks, but always escaping from his touch. By and by he spent all his time beside her, and cared for nothing else than to gaze beseechingly into the lovely eyes that looked into his own with the same fever of longing. Absorbed in the adoration of this strange being who seemed so responsive to his passion and yet so unwilling to allow him near, he forgot to eat or even sleep, and became only a wan shadow of his former self. The nymph, too, was pining away with hopeless love, for her face grew pale and thin, and the deep-shadowed eyes were full of sadness. Sometimes Narcissus slept from sheer exhaustion, but when the moonlight fell on the calm water, he would wake with a start and look anxiously to see whether the nymph was sharing his weary vigil, and always he found her waiting there in the cool depths of the pool. Finally he grew so sick with longing that he died of his hopeless love, without ever knowing that it was no water nymph whom he adored, but only his own reflection. The gods, believing that such devotion should not go unrecognized, changed him into a white flower which bears his name, and this is usually found blooming beside some clear lake or tiny crystal pool.